Welcome to this explainer. If you're an undergraduate law student, you already know that figuring out how a state actually operates is absolutely crucial. So today, we're giving you the definitive guide to exactly that, entirely through the lens of constitutional law, or as we foundationally call it in Indonesian legal studies, Hukum Tata Negara, which we'll just call HTN to keep things simple. We're going to unpack the complex machinery of the state, look at its structural boundaries, and really dig into the supreme rules that hold the whole thing together. Okay, let's jump right in. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll start with a broad intro to constitutional law, check out how some of the top experts define it, and then zero in on our main objects of study, the concrete state and the Constitution. After that, we'll map out the strict boundaries of the field, and finally, wrap things up with a scholarly reflection and our required reading list. All right, part one, let's get right into our introduction to constitutional law. Imagine for a second what happens when an entire nation needs a comprehensive operating manual. You literally can't run a country on a handshake, right? Just like our everyday society relies on rules to keep the peace, which is exactly what Lady Justice represents, the state itself desperately needs a supreme legal framework. The government holds an incredible amount of power. Without a rigid system to organize that power and, frankly, protect citizens from its misuse, you don't have a functioning state. You just have chaos. Constitutional law is basically the scale that balances state authority right alongside citizen rights. So the big takeaway here is that HTN acts as this massive, overarching structural foundation. It's the ultimate architectural blueprint of the nation. It dictates exactly how state institutions are established. It decides who actually has the power to do what, how the different branches of government talk to each other, and most importantly, how those branches interact with us, the people. Moving on to Section 2, let's see how the heavyweight legal scholars actually define all of this. You know, legal theory is always a lot easier to grasp when you stand on the shoulders of giants. So we're starting with Christian van Vollenhoven. His take is incredibly foundational and honestly very structural. He looks at the state almost like a giant corporate hierarchy. His definition really emphasizes the tiers of society, the upper and lower levels, along with territorial boundaries, and the specific functional bodies of the state. It's a very mechanical, organizational way to look at how a state is built. Now, let's see how that idea evolves. Mo Kusanardi and Harmeli Ibrahim take Vollenhoven's sort of mechanical definition and they add something absolutely vital, the human element. They acknowledge the organization and the state apparatus for sure, but listen to that crucial addition at the end, the position of citizens and their human rights. They're arguing that you simply cannot study the structure of a state without also studying the rights of the people living inside it. And that brings us to Jimli Ashadigi, who really modernizes the whole concept for us. He brings the Constitution straight to the forefront. For Ashadigi, HTN isn't just a dry list of rules. It's the study of a collective agreement. It's a living, breathing consensus among the people about how they actually want to be governed. It's a behavioral reality that shapes both institutional mechanisms and the relationship with citizens. Okay, part 3. Let's talk about the core object of study here, the concrete state. Now that we've got our definitions down, what exactly are we studying? Well, as law students, there's a hard line you have to draw here between general state science, often called ilmu negara, and constitutional law. State science is abstract. It studies the theory of what a state is conceptually. But constitutional law, that deals with the concrete. It studies a very specific state, like the Republic of Indonesia, right here and right now. It is totally grounded in reality. To be super clear about this, when we talk about studying the concrete state in HTN, we mean it has these exact characteristics. We are bound by the current time frame and specific territorial borders. We are exclusively analyzing positive law. And if you need a quick refresher, positive law just means the law that is actually valid and enforced today, not some historical or theoretical law. We are strictly looking at the real mechanisms operating in the government at this very second. Which brings us to Section 4. The absolute heart of HTN, the Constitution. If the concrete state is the body, it literally cannot survive without a heart. And in constitutional law, that heart is the Constitution itself. When legal scholars break it down, they anatomize it using 3 distinct dimensions, because it is so much more than just a piece of paper. First, we study the material dimension, which is the actual substance and the ideals it holds. Then there's the formal dimension, where we look at who actually has the authority to make or amend it, and the processes they use. And finally, the textual or administrative dimension. This is the literal, physical, written document, often academically called the groundwit. You really have to understand all three dimensions together to get the full picture. Think about the logo of the Constitutional Court. It serves as such a powerful reminder of what we are actually protecting here. Because the Constitution isn't just text. It represents the ultimate collective consensus of the people. It's the shared ideals of an entire nation. That's exactly why we need specific state institutions, like a constitutional court, to act as guardians. They ensure that the everyday actions of the concrete state never, ever violate the heart of its foundational agreement. All right, Section 5, Scope and Boundaries. Let's draw the lines.
We've got to be crystal clear on where HTN starts and stops compared to other fields of law. So what falls under its umbrella? Well, these are the four main parameters. We analyze the Constitution and how it changes. We look at the broad, basic patterns of how the state is actually administered. We meticulously chart out the structure and the relationships between different state institutions, the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And finally, we look at the rules governing the relationship between the state and the citizen, with a huge focus on the protection of human rights.
Now, here's a really crucial comparison you need to nail: the difference between constitutional law and its close sibling administrative law, or HAN. Think of it like this. HTN is generally static. It builds the state's machinery and its structure. But once that machine is built, administrative law takes over. HAN is highly dynamic. It's the set of rules that dictates how that machinery actually moves, operates, and executes its daily duties. So basically, HTN builds the car and HAN drives it. And finally, Section 6. Let's look at our bibliography and leave you with a final reflection. If you want to master this stuff, here is your essential reading list. The insights we've discussed today are heavily grounded in these specific foundational texts. You've got Jimlius Shadiki's brilliant work on post-reform frameworks, Kuznardi and Abraham's classic introduction, and Tutik's deep structural analysis. Seriously, if you're aiming to truly understand constitutional law, consider these texts absolutely mandatory reading. By the way, I want to quickly mention that this explainer was meticulously put together by the online law study material compilation team. It's designed specifically to be an authoritative online teaching medium and a rock-solid learning reference for law students everywhere. The whole goal here is to make these really complex structural concepts accessible and to keep them intensely focused for your academic journey. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to chew on. We've talked a lot about the text, the structure, and the concrete reality of a state. So imagine this. What if a state follows the exact written text of its constitution to the letter, but in its daily, empirical practice, it actively oppresses the human rights of its citizens? Is that concrete state still operating within the true collective essence of constitutional law? It's a tough one, right? Think deeply about that tension between written rules and lived reality. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and I'll see you in our next explainer.